We are dealing tonight then with the miracle of joy. It was said many years ago by Saint Germain that joy is the motor of life. We have heard of a number of cases where people were given up to die, and then some sudden interest in almost any hobby, even religion, has sometimes seized their life. And these people have begun to function with a feeling of joy in all that they did. And as a result, their illness has abated. We have heard of even cases of terminal cancer, where the people were on their last legs, ready to give up their final breath, when for what reason we know not, perhaps it was the idea that they only had a few days left to live or a few weeks left to live, that actually cut them loose and set them free from the sense of struggle. But they sort of adopted a fatalistic attitude toward everything, and they started being joyful because they said, what's the use? I don't have anything to lose. My goose is already cooked, so I might just as well try to be joyous about it and spend my last few days on earth in joy instead of in sorrow. So they started out with this feeling, and lo and behold, the miracle of joy took over. And the first thing you know, the condition of cancer began to remit in their system, and they actually achieved a complete remission, which medical science has been again and again baffled by. Now, science claims they do not know what causes cancer. We do know that great souls like Ramakrishna have had cancer. He passed away with cancer of the throat. So, of course, it does not seem to only visit the wicked, but even sometimes the very good. But we are not so much concerned with that as we are with the power of joy to affect the cells. One condition that seems to always be noticed with the onset of cancer is that people many times become very depressed. We also have noticed that people who are very hateful in disposition are sometimes the chief victims of this disease, which, as we understand from the inner, is created out of hate, either from this generation, the present life, or a past life. Feelings of hate act in this way, and I want to bring out to you just how it works. You have a cell, and the cell is normal. Now, this normal cell has an energy quotient, which it is required to maintain in order to be in perfect health. If the energy of the cell falls below its own natural quotient, of course, it becomes a disturbed cell. In the disturbed state, the cell may mutate, and it may become cancerous. If it does, the cell begins then to reach out to devour energy by multiplying itself. Some people seem to feel that the cell goes out and eats the cells that are next to it. Actually, it does not eat them, it simply begins to divide. And as it divides, it also conveys the characteristic that it itself has acquired, the mutated quality, and so the cells that divide also begin to divide in a short period of time. Therefore, it starts out very, very small, and because it keeps dividing, it begins to squeeze out healthy tissue and spreads in some particular cases very rapidly. Now, this is a frightful thing when it gets into vital organs, because it doesn't take very long before it can occupy enough millimeters of that organ to completely interfere with the function. And in such cases, people don't have very long left on earth. Now, joy seems to enter in to the cells of the whole body. If your mind becomes joyful, and not without a cause, of course, I don't think you can fool yourself. You have to enter into some legitimate activity in order to have this miracle of joy take place. But if it takes place, it is very likely that the thoughts of your mind will affect the cells of your physical body. And there is a very, very strong possibility that this affection, I mean the affecting of the cells, will produce a change that can and has in some cases turned the mutated cells back into a state of normalcy and cause these conditions to remit. Now, joy is not only then good for you physically, it is good for your soul. It makes the bones grow fat, as they might say. This does not mean, of course, that your bones change their size. It means that they have that particular quality that we always attribute to a fat person. We say they are jolly. And I think one of the reasons why fat people or plump people are jolly is because the cells of the body are always eating, you see. Oh, I'm not through. Wait till you hear the rest of it. And they keep taking in food. And they never complain as long as they're taking in food. Because hunger is actually the complaining of the cells, the clamoring of the cells for food. Now, the cells very seldom will expel the energy they have in them if they can get you or induce you to eat. So the cells will clamor for food by making hunger pangs in your stomach, and you go out and eat. Thus, you are always intaking and very seldom actually expelling energy from your cells. Therefore, the best way to reduce, the best way to reduce is to stop eating, to push yourself away from the table and take in less food than what you should. Because here's the whole secret. When you take in less food than you need to run your body, then the cells begin to throw out their energy into the body to supply it with the energy it is not getting from the food. And therefore, you begin to reduce in a very natural manner. Now, while this is taking place, you may often feel depressed. This is why caffeine is often put in reducing pills, because caffeine is an antidepressant. It makes you feel a little better. It peps up the heart action and so forth. But getting back to the expelling of energy from the cells, the expelling of energy from the cells will depress you. And when you don't expel any energy from the cells, and you're always taking in food all the time, you see, you feel quite happy. And that's why fat people and plump people are jolly. This happens to be true. Now, just as some people have poor appetites, so some people have too good an appetite, as they say. And therefore, they eat too much. And there is an association with eating too little and depression, and eating too much and joy. But this type of joy is short-lived, because you will always pay the piper. And if you continue to eat and eat and eat, you will make yourself a victim of many diseases later in life. So the thin man or the thin woman is much better off in the future than the people who are eating too much and therefore so jolly, because most of the plumper people later in life are very apt to be very depressed when various diseases come about as a result of their overeating. Now, I'm mentioning these things because we have to touch on them as we go along, otherwise we do not produce the miracle of joy. The miracle of joy is the result of a very delicate balance in the organism, the total organism of man. It must take into account the perfect body, the perfect mind, and the perfect soul or consciousness. Now, consciousness should be the director of life in all of its departments. Whether you're dealing with the conscious mind of the consciousness or the subconscious mind of the consciousness. The subconscious mind, of course, takes over most of the functions that are involved in the beating of the heart, the breathing, and the flow of the blood, the opening of various valves in the body, is all a result of subconscious functions. You don't have to telegraph messages to your body to take care of these things. Your body will take care of it automatically. You can go to sleep at night and not worry about a thing. So this is very wonderful. So I'm merely touching briefly in this lecture on the miracle of joy from the standpoint of the physical body and the balancing of the mind and the balancing of the emotions. Now, I have long contended that people are not really happy and cannot release joy in their life by always saying, like some of the Christian scientists used to say, and I've told this so many times that I hate to tell it again, but every time I tell it, people enjoy it, so I might as well tell it again as part of this for some of you who have never heard it. The story of the Catholic priest and the Christian scientist and the Jewish rabbi who died and all went to hell. And there they were, of course, in hell. And the Catholic priest, he turned to the rabbi and he said, "Rabbi, why are you here?" And the rabbi said, "Well, you know, we Jews are not supposed to eat pork." Yes, that's right. He said, "Well," he said, "I used to always go around the corner to a little stand there and I'd get a pork sandwich before we had our services, and that's why I'm here." But he said, "Father, why in the world are you here?" And the Catholic priest looked at him a little bit ashamed, and he said, "Well," he said, "you know, we Catholics are not supposed to eat meat on Friday." And he said, I was supposed to eat fish, but he said, "I always snuck around the corner and got a hamburger on Friday before Mass, and that's why I'm here." So then the two of them ganged up, and they looked at the Christian Scientist, and they said, "Well, you're a Christian Scientist." They said, "How in the world come you ever got here? I thought Mary Baker Eddy could deliver you out of that." Christian Scientist folded his arms like this. He said, "I'm not here." And of course, he wasn't. He wasn't there. So this principle of denial is sometimes, I think, the cause of a lot of people not being really happy, because you have to be honest in order to be happy. But if you say, "I am perfect," is it so? Well, God made you perfect, didn't He? Didn't God make you perfect? But the question now before us is, are we manifesting that perfection in all that we do now? I think that the miracle of joy, the flooding of our consciousness with joy, will help us in manifesting the perfection of God far more than the manifesting of sorrow. But I still think we need a reasonable objectivity. We must be able to see what is socially correct, what is spiritually correct, what things ought to be treated as anathemas, and what things should be accepted without reserve. There are some things in life that you can just drink in and have all you want and never worry about it. And one of those things is beauty. And so, when you start to realize the perfection of God in your own world, you need not hesitate to enjoy nature. Now, nature is wonderful. If you get up early in the morning sometime, when you're accustomed to rising later, and you see the sun coming up, there is nothing to stop little shivers of joy from actually going all over your body. Some of you have had these spontaneous releases of joy. You've gone out on the brink, perhaps, of a great cliff or a mountain, and you saw the first golden rays of the sun with a little pink coming up, and then the gold, and then you see it peek its head right over the horizon. And I don't care how many times you've seen it or how many times you will see it. Each time the soul can be thrilled by it. But in order to have the miracle of joy really working for you, you should learn to amplify your feelings of joy. You know what I mean by a thrill? When a band goes by, like playing one of the Sousa marches, and your heart beats just a little faster, and you stand up there and you watch the flag go by. Of course, this was about 30 years ago. Now people are not too excited anymore. But nevertheless, it still works for some of us, and we are happy. Now, what I am recommending to you in this lecture, The Miracle of Joy, is the amplifying of the feeling by your consciously demanding of life that life amplify that feeling. In other words, when you get excited by an outer condition like a sunrise, or a twinkle in a child's eye, or some cute remark from an old gray head, it doesn't matter what it is, don't be afraid to get with it. Don't be afraid to go into it. Let yourself just become excited about these good things, because these good things will induce a feeling of joy which can spread in ripples from your little toes, your little pinkies, all the way up to the top of your head. And if you do that, you can even see yourself just standing there, vibrating. You know what I'm talking about? You just vibrate that joy. And this is a magnificent thing, a great exercise, which when you enter into it, after a while will accustom your nerve paths to respond to the feeling. And so then, just as people reach a stage where they have these awful feelings of depression, and the mind follows the depressed state, going down, 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 so the consciousness can go up, 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 right on up, see? And you yourself are the one who has to decide whether you're going to do it. You will never have the results from the miracle of joy unless you actually practice it. You must participate. When I talk about nerve paths, I am only talking about conditioned responses now. I don't always use the words just the way I want them at the given time, So now I'm coming back and to say I'm talking about conditioned responses which will affect the nerves and will flow over the nerve paths and cause you to feel those thrills that actually will make you happy. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with these things. I think the miracle of joy is the greatest antidepressant, you see, in the world. You have to be able to stop the forces of depression, which in so many people have become quite natural. And the moment that their minds are free for a moment in some degree of idleness, right away, what do? They begin to think, someday I'll probably have to die. And I wonder how it's going to be. Is the friendly undertaker measuring me right now? And should I pick out my tombstone or take out an insurance policy with Bankers Life or State Farm Mutual? And, well, it's true. On and on they go, and where they stop, nobody knows. And after a while, they get from the tip of their toes to the top of their head so loaded with depression that they feel like a clod. And so they finally take 2 aspirins and go to bed and say, I can't face life anymore. Pull up the covers. Isn't it terrible? But everybody does it, until they learn to condition themselves to the miracle of joy. This is the only way we can survive here, is to have to laugh a little bit over some of the silly circumstances that happen to us. And if you can learn to laugh at yourself, well, then you've really got something. Now, I don't have the laughing bag with me tonight. Tom, you better bring the laughing bag in. It's in my office on the desk. If you can learn to laugh at yourself, you've got it made. That's the greatest problem in the world, is that we take ourselves too seriously. We say, I wonder what I'm going to do tomorrow. let me see now. There's that particular luncheon engagement I promised that I would attend.
Oh, something happened.
You see what I mean? Now there's your depressing in action right over there. It's a bag full of laughs. I keep that on my desk, you see.
When the going's rough.
What? When the going is rough. That's most of the time. But let the miracle of joy, Emma, flood your soul day and night, you know.
Well, where did you get that?
Maybe we should handle these in our book table, huh? I think we'll handle them and have Al Ladd in charge of sales.
They sold $2 million worth of those in New York City.
How many?
$2 million.
$2 million worth sold in New York. Proves that people like to laugh. Better than they do to
I
cry.
could have thought of it.
What is it they say? Laugh and the world laughs with you. Weep and you weep alone. Yet how many people weep alone? There's a lot more people weeping than there are laughing, whether the whole world laughs with you or not. Just remember that. So the secret of joy is something that should be taught to your children. A very wise man in this country who has a school, which I'm not going to get into because I'm not in the advertising business, he has children sit out in a little pond, near a little pond like Thoreau's Walden, and the children sit there and take their shoes off, and they stick their toes in the water, and then they read poetry that tells about how the water ripples along with their toes and how the little thrills come up their legs and so forth, and they learn to enjoy nature that way. This man actually trains them or conditions them to respond to nature and to their physical bodies. Now, one of the problems we have, of course, in life is that we're overly conscious of our physical body, but we're overly conscious of it the wrong way. I mean, every time we get a little pain or an ache, right away we amplify the pain or the ache. We get a tummy ache, it's appendicitis. We get a headache, and it's brain tumor. It's just absolutely frightful, the things that we do. Just simply because we let our imaginations go downhill when the imagination should go uphill. Now, what good is it going to do you to let it go downhill? If the verdict is one way, it's going to still be the same way, isn't it? But maybe, you know, if you let the miracle of joy work in your world, before you get to the doctor, your laughter and your happiness will cure your illness. So when you come in, you won't have any. And this is very, very possible. You just try it sometime. At least it'll do this much for you. It'll keep you in good spirits until the end. It reminds me of Liberace. He used to say that he laughed all the way to the bank. He laughed all the way to the bank. I don't know. Well, we'll go on with our miracle of joy. What time is it? I have 10 more minutes. What's that? You mean the joy is the miracle, or that I have only 10 minutes? I think it's a miracle that I made it this far. I would like to deal a little bit with control of the moods then, because the moods seem to be able to function only from the subconscious level. This has been my observation. That they will work without our knowledge. And we'll be walking down the street and we feel perfectly happy, and all at once the subconscious mood will peek its little ugly head up through the surface of the water. And all at once we feel just something terrible. One man said he felt lousy, and another fellow said, well, he felt good and lousy. And Saint Germain said that unless you want to have them in your house, don't mention the word. So we better not talk about it. It's absolutely true. So I think it's the moods, the subconscious moods that we must be afraid of. And so I've been analyzing why we get this way, and I've decided that we let these morbid thoughts creep in idle moments, or we listen to the wrong radio programs, or we read the wrong kind of books, and we let, as the psalmist said, let the meditations of my heart and the, what is that? And the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my Redeemer. Now, I used to have a teacher in school who had a very unusual meditation on the 23rd Psalm. And it went like this: the Chevy is my auto, I shall not want another. It leadeth me beside the repair shops. It vexeth my soul. I anoint its tires with patches. Its radiator runneth over. It has a breakdown in the presence of mine enemies. And if this thing shall follow me all the days of my life, I shall dwell in the bug house forever. Amen. You see what I mean? Take that to your mama now. Every time, I'm going to tell you, he's a faker over there in that corner. Every single time that he hears that laughter, he looks at me with the most awful expression. And then as soon as I point him out to you, then he switches the other way. You should have seen Stella Lengi. You know what I did with her? I planted that in her shopping bag. And she went down in the middle of Newstetter's department store, or one department store. Wait a minute, which one was it now? I know which one it was, that old-fashioned Hibbard's. And right in the middle of Hibbard's, I pushed the button in her sack, and she went down the aisles trying to make believe that nobody saw it. That was the time that the Roman nose knows. She was really going, I'll tell you. We had a lot of fun before Christmas. So, my suggestion to you in the 5 minutes remaining to me is that you develop a system of feeding your inner consciousness with joyous thoughts and learning to extract from life all of the beautiful things that are in life. And this is a religious experience, but you know the problem with us is that we think of religion as a straitjacket. We think of religion as something that's going to just hold us up like a corset. It's going to brace us. And we get so stiff that, I mean, we're almost brittle and afraid we're going to break or come apart if we say thank God. And you know that's true. And the world is far worse than the spiritual people are, of course. The spiritual people at least are, you know, willing to talk about God, and they like to talk about God. But the people in the world, they practically hold their nose when someone mentions the deity today in a public place. And this is absolutely true. Well, we cannot afford to set a bad example for them, and this is one of the problems that the Great White Brotherhood is facing. that some of our members have very long faces. And they are very poor examples of the ascended Master. Now, I don't think for 1 minute that Saint Germain runs around and carries a laughing bag. And I just can't imagine Jesus carrying one either. So you see what level of consciousness I am in. But on the other hand, you see, every executive, like Saint Germain and Jesus, has to have a few fools on his staff that are fools for Christ's sake. And I want to tell you the story of the juggler, because some of you know it and some of you don't, and I think it's a very beautiful story, and particularly because on the picture that I have of the juggler, he has 7 balls, each one for one of the color rays. An orange, of course, is in there, and an apple, and all these different things. He's juggling all this fruit. But it seems there was a monastery connected with a big church. And this brother monk came there. And he got to the church, and some of the brothers there were bakers, and some of them were candlestick makers, and some of them were cooks, and some of them were workers in the field, and a few of them prayed. And so, what actually happened is really very funny. This monk, the only thing he could do was juggle. And juggle he did, to the amusement of the brothers. He was juggling all the time, every time they saw him. And they got a little impatient with his juggling. And they assigned him first to the bakery, and he failed in the bakery. Then they assigned him to the fields, and he failed in the fields. And then they assigned him to washing pots and pans, and he wasn't too happy there. All he wanted to do was juggle. And so the word got around, passed all around among the monks. So finally, one day, one of the monks who was quite close to the abbot, the head man in that monastery, why, he came to the door of the chapel, and there, before the statue of the Blessed Virgin, this monk was standing juggling to her. Why, he was horrified. What a terrible sacrilege. He couldn't even wait a minute to look. He closed the door quickly. He rushed up the stairs, the stone stairs, up the tower of the abbot's office. May I come in? Yes. He didn't even hardly wait for an answer. He rushed in. The abbot was there. He said, oh, he said, terrible things happened. He said, I can't even tell you about it. Just come with me. So the abbot got all agitated and confused, and down the stairs they went, and they came to the door of the chapel. And there he was. By this time he'd worked up a sweat, and the sweat was pouring down his face with his juggling. And so he said, here, Father, he says, just look. They opened the door of the chapel and they looked, and they just could hardly believe their eyes what was happening, for he was juggling, and as they watched his juggling and the sweat pouring down his face, all at once, Mary, the mother of Jesus, the statue, began to move. And down she came from the pedestal, and she reached into her robe, she pulled out a little handkerchief, and she wiped the sweat off the juggler's face. And the abbot and his friend stole silently up the stairs. Thank you.